Welcome to the Sober and Happy podcast, where we talk about all things recovery related, how to navigate the challenges that we'll face along the way on our journey towards our best lives, and how we could go from living a life of simply just being sober to a life where we're both sober and happy. When I first immersed myself in recovery, I'd hear people talk a lot about the importance of emotional sobriety. But when I asked people what it was or how to achieve it, I was surprised by the general lack of understanding of what it actually was. It seemed like one of the terms people tended to repeat but didn't have a deep understanding of it. So what is emotional sobriety? Why is it important, and how do we achieve it? Well, that is what we're going to talk about today. So buckle up. This is going to be a great episode. Welcome back. The Sober and Happy newsletter is officially in publication. In the newsletter, I'll be talking about topics related to recovery, along with sharing resources that I have found helpful in my recovery journey. If you're interested in receiving the newsletter, just go to soberandhappy.com/newsletter and sign up. I'd love to hear feedback on it and any suggestions on things you'd like to see in it. Okay, now back to the episode. Emotional sobriety, which is often overlooked, is a pivotal element in our path to recovery. But what is emotional sobriety? When I started asking people to explain that term, the most common answer I got was some version of being happy, joyous, and free. But then I'd wonder, if I'm having a day that I wasn't happy, joyous, and free, does that mean that I'm not emotionally sober? I thought that was true for a while, so when I had bad days, I automatically assumed I was doing something wrong in my recovery. Then I'd get down on myself, and as a result, the next day would be even worse. I created a pattern where I chased happiness mostly from things outside of myself, which is actually the opposite of emotional sobriety. I think this is what keeps many people in the relapse cycle we see so often among many of us in recovery. We get sober, do really well when things are going our way, and then the first time life deals us a big blow, we spiral downwards and go back to our old way of dealing with emotions, and we relapse. When I decided to leave AA and started looking at other methods of recovery that were more aligned with my beliefs, I came across several articles about emotional sobriety that made sense to me. It is important to define it for yourself, but this is the definition that I relate to most today. Emotional sobriety is the next evolution after physical sobriety. From the first day you quit drinking, you are 100% sober. But if simply quitting drinking was enough to stay sober, no one would ever relapse. Emotional sobriety is about how to live a life of sobriety that doesn't feel like a jail sentence that is served one day at a time. It is about moving beyond the daily struggle of being sober. It does not mean every day is going to be all rainbows and butterflies and that we're not going to struggle. It is learning to deal with those struggles. It is about managing our emotions in a healthy and constructive way without relying on drugs or alcohol to cope. It's recognizing that numbing our feelings with substances only masks the issues we need to address. It's about facing our emotions head on, even when they're uncomfortable or painful. For many of us, this is going to be brand new. I used alcohol to numb my feelings for my entire adult life until I got sober. Then I turned to many other unhealthy habits after getting sober as a crutch for dealing with emotions I was still unable or unwilling to feel. So how do we begin to achieve a level of emotional sobriety? I think the first step is to have a realistic understanding of the uncertainty of life. No matter how hard we try to control our circumstances, no matter how good of a person we are, there are going to be times when things are not going to go our way. When I first got sober, I had a run of good fortune that lasted almost a year. I was working a good program of recovery, helping others, and it seemed like the universe was rewarding me. Everything was falling into place. I got back to work at a great company. I got my own place, I was repairing damaged relationships in my life, and I started creating new healthy relationships. It seemed like luck was on my side. And then an avalanche of what I considered bad luck started piling up. My dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, close friends started relapsing, multiple failed attempts at romantic relationships ended in heartbreak, I had a falling out with my sponsor at the time, and to end my bad run, I had to put my dog to sleep. It seemed like my luck had run out. I blamed the universe. I blamed karma. I blamed everyone else. And then one of the most dangerous thoughts started creeping into my head. Is being sober even worth it if I'm going to be miserable all the time? Problem I was having was twofold. At some point, I started believing that doing good equaled getting good fortune. And second, I was chalking everything up to either good luck or bad luck. I was unable to accept the fact that no matter what I do, life circumstances are going to happen. People are going to die, jobs are going to be lost, friendships are going to end, and the person I thought was going to be the one often isn't going to end up being the one. And there's nothing I could do to prevent anything bad from ever happening to me. Now, I do believe that you could tip good and bad circumstances in your favor. For example, when I was drinking every night, dragging myself to work most of the time, and not being the best employee when I did actually show up, my odds of losing a job are much higher than it is now when I show up consistently to work every day and perform at a high standard. But that still doesn't make me immune to a corporate downsizing tomorrow. Accepting that life is going to have challenges is the first step to emotional sobriety. Once I was able to accept that fact, it removed the constant belief that the universe was always rewarding or punishing me, and I began to not take it so personally when something out of my control happened to me. The acceptance alone does not fix the feelings around it, though, and that is where next level emotional sobriety exists. We are still going to experience sadness, anger, depression, anxiety, and fear. The core of emotional sobriety is learning how to no longer try to avoid, numb, or push down those feelings. It is instead learning how to accept and process those emotions in a healthy way. In recovery, so much focus is given to the avoidance of triggers, yet we often focus on the outside circumstances that trigger us, but avoid addressing the emotions beneath those triggers, which is actually what causes us to relapse. If we only attempt to avoid the outside triggers, we'll spend our whole lives in avoidance, which we'll eventually learn is an impossible task. But once we address the underlying emotions, the outside circumstances will no longer have the same power over us. For example, when I first got sober, I was angry at the normalization of alcohol in our society. I was pissed that everywhere I turned, it seemed like the world was pushing alcohol on me. Constant commercials on TV glorifying alcohol, beer displays at the grocery store, billboards with my favorite beer on them, and company Christmas parties where it seemed like everyone else besides me was drinking and having a good time. Everywhere I looked, it seemed like alcohol was being shoved down my throat, and each time it would trigger me. I first tried avoidance. I would turn the TV off during commercial breaks. I drove a different route home to avoid that one giant Coors Light billboard, and I stopped going to parties where people were drinking. But it still pissed me off. I may have avoided seeing the actual beer commercial by turning the TV off when I was watching the football game, but for 2 minutes while I stared at the blank screen, I was angry at the fact that I had to turn it off. No matter how much avoidance I tried, it never removed the underlying emotion beneath it. It wasn't the beer commercial that pissed me off. It wasn't the fact that a large part of our society still drinks. It was that I never addressed that I was still pissed I couldn't drink without consequences. That is the next step in emotional sobriety, which is self-awareness. It is breaking free of the habit of stuffing down our emotions and beginning to acknowledge them without judgment. Once I'm able to do that, I could start recognizing what really is bothering me. Back to the things that were triggering me. What do you see in almost every beer commercial? People hanging out with their friends and having the time of their life. The billboard had a guy who looked like the life of the party surrounded by beautiful women. Everyone at the company Christmas party who was drinking seemed to be having more fun than I was while downing Diet Cokes. What was I doing most of the time since I got sober? Not having fun. Once I became aware of the emotion behind those triggers, I realized that it really wasn't that society and marketing tied drinking and fun together. It really was the fact that I bought into that for so many years and developed a belief that I could not have fun without alcohol. I was angry. I was jealous. I was lonely. I was confused. I was sad because I lost something that I thought for a long period of my life was so good to me. And every one of those emotions is perfectly normal for someone who's going through a loss. In recovery, we spend a lot of time demonizing the substances that we're addicted to. It's like we feel that if we make them out to be completely evil, we could somehow convince ourselves not to go back to them. But think back to a time where you broke up with someone. Did it make you feel any better when friend after friend told you you're too good for them anyways, or you're better off without them? Those might be true, but I don't know about you, hearing that never made the pain go away. In fact, after about the third or fourth person telling me that, it started to piss me off. I knew alcohol was bad for me, but I needed to accept the fact that it was a relationship that at some point made me feel good. And just like seeing a happy couple walking down the street annoyed me fresh off a breakup, so did seeing other people enjoying alcohol. And the only way to heal from that loss was to acknowledge the feelings without judgment for what they were. Accepting and understanding the emotions behind the circumstances will alone begin to take the power away from them. But then comes the more challenging part, and that is learning how to process them. Most of us spent years stuffing down emotions that we feel with various substances. Many of us never were taught how to process these emotions in the first place, so this may be uncharted territory. This part of emotional sobriety is something that we learn over time, and honestly not something that can be explained in a 15-minute podcast. I can tell you things that worked for me, but you must discover what works best for you, which only comes from trying different things and repeating what works. I could tell you many of the resources that have helped me so you could begin this process for yourself. If you have the resources available to get into therapy, I suggest you find a good therapist that you connect with. Also, I've found many books that have been helpful in my ongoing journey of emotional sobriety. The 4 Agreements by Miguel Ruiz, Rising Strong by Brené Brown, The Body Keeps Score by Bessel van der Kolk, I probably butchered that name, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle, Emotional Agility by Susan David, and The Untethered Soul by Michael Allen Singer. Don't worry if you weren't writing those down. I will list them all in the show notes for you. I know that seems like a lot of homework for one episode of the podcast, but learning how to achieve emotional sobriety is a process that will take time, patience, and compassion for yourself. During this process, you're going to feel a lot of emotion, so be very present in your responses. In the beginning, it's going to be natural to default to people, places, and things that will temporarily make us feel better. When that happens, pause and instead focus on self-care that will support you in feeling and processing the emotions instead of avoiding them. Emotional sobriety is a journey that's worth every step. It truly is what shifts recovery from a constant struggle to a life that we could fully embrace and enjoy. I want to thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you're finding value from listening to this podcast. If you are, I'm asking for 2 huge favors from you this week that would help me. Share the episode with one other person, and please subscribe to the podcast, both of which will help it grow. New episodes come out each Friday, so I look forward to connecting with you next week. And as always, thank you so much for listening, and keep living sober and happy.